Okay, welcome back. Council's finished our recess. We're starting a relatively new process. This is just our second time around where we have our council meetings just divided into two halves. And so we actually have two opportunities for delegations, one in the afternoon and one in the evening session. So I'd welcome everybody that's here. We do have the delegation portion at the very front of our agenda. We also have some public hearings. And so if you were here to speak to public hearings related to small lot residential district, then that you'll have an opportunity to speak to that specifically after. But if you're here to speak to any other matter, and I imagine there might be some folks with respect to accessible transportation or DTS, then we will do that up front. I would let everyone know that we did have a pretty extensive session where we had the views of members of the board, drivers, folks that work in facilities that provide care, users of the service, and caregivers and loved ones of people who rely on the service. So we have had an opportunity, and that's not at all to say that we don't want to hear from anybody who came for the second part of the session, but just to let you know that we have already, you're not the only ones that are speaking to council on this issue. Additionally, at the midway point of our meeting earlier, just before the recess, Council passed a three-part motion. First, affirming Council's support for accessible transportation in Grand Prairie. Secondly, confirming that the city would provide funding as approved in the 2019 budget for DTS up until the end of June, with the requirement that they resume the level of service previous to the change, recently announced change. And then the third part of it was that we directed our administration to basically research alternatives to find out, should DTS not be able to continue, how the city might be able to support accessible transportation in our community on a going forward basis. So there was some action that council took earlier before the rest of before this session, and so with that context, we certainly want to make sure that anybody who made their way to council this evening has an opportunity to speak. And I did have a few folks that let us know ahead of time, and so Kate Blimke, Kate, I think you're sort of first on my list. We'll invite you to come forward, and we ask all of our delegations to give us about 5 minutes in terms of your presentation, and then we'll have an opportunity for any questions that council members might have for you. But just introduce yourself, and if it's just yourself, then we have your name. If you're joined by anyone, if you could introduce anybody else that might come up with you. Ms. Blimke, and we don't bite. We're quite a ways away anyways, we couldn't get to you, but please know that you're welcome, and good evening. And you'll just have to make sure that the microphone, we had moved them, we had a number of folks, you're free to move that entire thing, it's totally fine. We had a number of folks attend who were in wheelchairs, and so we moved the microphones forward so that those whose chairs wouldn't get under the table had the microphone in a way that would work for them. So, Ms. Blimke, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Kate Blimke. I'm here on behalf of my daughter. First of all, I would like to thank Councillor Bressie for responding to my email and answering the questions that I had. I sent an email to all the councillors, but he was the only one that answered. So I am Kate Blimke. I'm representing my daughter, Jenna, who as of last week, which I might add was National Accessibility Week, is no longer able to partake in city events because she needs the bus. So my question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the city transport, city buses that we see is completely under the city transit system. It's not an arm's length.
So the
I'm just asking a question for my own information, not the DTS, but buses that I see on the...
So the large buses, the GP transit buses are City of Grand Prairie buses. The DTS buses are operated by the Independent Society, which is
right.
Not the city.
That's what I just wanted to clarify. I guess my question is why the city has chosen to support transport for most of the citizens of Grand Prairie, but have chosen to the citizens like my daughter who are a little more vulnerable, a little more fragile, have chosen to want to keep them at arm's length. I'm concerned with the talk of closed door meeting to discuss options. I'm afraid of a not-for-profit or a for-profit option. I guess what I would like to know is why the city chooses not to protect the Disabled Transportation Society. I don't think that, especially people who don't have as much of a voice as, say, me, should have to rely on fundraising, which may or may not, as anyone who's done any fundraising knows, sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. So fundraising that may or not be successful, grants that may or may not be here next year, and a city council who may or may not be receptive to what they have to say. That's my question, and that's what I would like to ask. I also, and I thought about this a long time before I decided I would say it, is I think that the city, and I guess in the Daily Herald Tribune, it was Mayor Given that was quoted, I'm thinking they were a bit disingenuous by saying, we gave them $1 million. Now, to me, Joe, taxpayer who reads the Daily Herald Tribune, that's a lot of money. But I would imagine that for an organization that runs 6 buses, 7 days a week, 13 to 14 hours a day, you can burn through $1 million pretty fast. And I also wonder, it says that the support had increased by 26% since 2015. At no point was it mentioned how much the ridership has increased. I could probably go back and look at my bills and say since 2015, my expenses have gone up 26%. So I didn't like the way that that was put forward. And so I did decide to say that. And maybe you want to speak to that. I don't know.
Sure. So, Ms. Wimpke, I absolutely don't mind at all you asking those questions, and totally fair. With respect to the increase in funding since 2015, it's factual. The city also, in that funding, covers things that a lot of our common expenses, like you and I and other businesses. Fuel cost increases would be something that would be significant that we would all face. That's something that the city does cover for DTS. And so certainly I can speak to it about the stuff that the City of Grand Prairie provides. The City of Grand Prairie does not have the ridership numbers. That's all property. That information is property of DTS, and so that would certainly be their story to tell. But I wanted to ensure that the public was aware of the factual information because it was my view, and I think my council colleagues would agree, that the perception that could have been left by the release that came out from Disabled Transportation Society was that something had changed in the last week and the city discontinued or cut funding to the organization sometime in May. And that absolutely isn't the case. The city's budget was approved in December of 2018. And at that time, it was known what the city's funding for DTS would be. And so I just wanted to ensure that everybody in the public was aware that there wasn't something new that had happened in the last week or the last month that caused the society to overnight change their level of service. So that was the intent of that comment.
Okay, and then back to my question, why the city has chosen to stay at arm's length. It's my understanding that this is not the first time that the city has been approached to take over this part of this service, accessible transportation.
So there is a long history of DTS being an independent organization from the city. I've served as a board member in the past, as a private volunteer, and also as a council member, as a number of other council members have. Our current representative is Councillor Friesen, and she mentioned in our earlier session some specific motions relating to the city involvement from the DTS board. So Councillor Friesen, did you want to speak to that, about why the city is maintaining the distance, I guess, that we are at this point?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor Given. Thank you, Ms. Wimpke, for attending today. And excuse me. I do appreciate the concern on behalf of your daughter, Jenna, and how critical it is. I've served on the appeal panels for the province for PDD and for AISH, and understand how very critical it is for folks to have access, not just to the urgent stuff, but for the social as well. And they have every right, residents of Grand Prairie have every right to participate fully in community, and we hope that it's restored for Jenna very quickly. So as the history goes, in 2018, the DTS did ask the city to take over operations. We undertook a study to say that that would be possible. And that kind of was the intent. And then at some point shortly after I was elected and started on the board decided to actually proceed with union negotiations on behalf of its staff, or with the union for its staff, and that all kind of went sort of dragged out, as such things tend to do. I then put forward a motion at the board, and I looked back through my notes. I believe it was last June or the July meeting, perhaps. But I put forward the motion that the city now assume operations and actually take over the union negotiations and everything that goes along with that. And the board said, no. We think we've got this. We're going to proceed. So the board of the society actually declined about a year ago to have the city assume operations. So it's not just that the city hasn't been willing to, it's simply that the two parties have not really come together in a timeline where we've both said, yeah, it's the right time to do this.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify that some, yeah, sure.
Yes, just a question. How do other cities in Alberta handle this?
So there are a variety of numbers and ways that different cities do in Alberta and throughout Canada. And right now I know that our administration is undertaking a review of that as we look at what may happen going forward. And this is not happening because DTS suspended services as of last week. It was happening before that. We put out a request for information a couple of months ago that just closed within the last couple of weeks for others to bring forward different ideas of how we may operate. And as part and parcel of all of that, our administration is looking at what other cities are doing that's working, what's not working, cities of similar size, cities that still have similar operations to ours, and some that are vastly different from ours. So that's a great question, but it's a little bit like going to GM and saying, what does a vehicle cost?
Okay, so then say it's my understanding there's a meeting Thursday discussing the options and what's been put forward, and that information will become public at some point or be brought up at the next council meeting, or?
Yeah, no, absolutely, I'll speak to that. We appreciate from the city's perspective, the right way to run a service is to ensure that riders have an ability to adjust to any changes, that there's lots of advance notice of changes, and certainly that's how we run the transit system that we run ourselves. We typically give at least 2 months notice, and actually I think we have a council motion specifically instructing our administration to provide a minimum of 60 days changes, because we also make changes to the system that we run. It would be our expectation that the City of Grand Prairie will do everything it can to inform the public and riders about the state of those negotiations or that discussion, recognizing that the DTS is an independent organization separate from the city, and that the relationship that the riders have and that the employees have is with that organization. And so there are certain parts of that conversation that are, I guess, not our story to tell, but we would expect, to the extent that we are allowed legally to tell our side of the story, that we will ensure that we're doing that, because to be very frank with you, I think council is frustrated by the approach that has been taken so far and the lack of notice that has been given to users. We will, for our part, ensure that we are giving as much disclosure to everybody about the state of the conversation as we can.
Okay, I appreciate that. I guess I need to contact them as well, and they can answer some of my questions. I guess then how do I find out what goes on at the point that you can let us know what goes on? Where do I go to find that out?
So I would expect that the City of Grand Prairie will provide updates to the public through sort of social media and through the traditional media. There won't be a need to wait until the next council meeting. We would proactively publish that information, and again, to the extent that's possible. If there are negotiations going on, we may not be able to disclose all that. But so as much as we can disclose information that's ours to disclose, we would do that proactively and out into the public and all the other channels, I guess, that you would traditionally see that. You wouldn't have to go and search for it on the city website. I think you can expect to see myself and other council members, the City of Grand Prairie, sharing that information widely. I would expect that we would do that likely the day following the meeting, so that we could give people at least an indication of what the status is, because we know how important it is in people's lives.
Okay, thank you very much.
Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us or highlight? I appreciate that you had a number of questions, and I think it's clear to council how important the service is for you and your family.
No, I think that's everything for now.
Okay. Thank you for being here this evening and making some time to present to us. We certainly appreciate it, and we'll want to make sure that we keep you and everybody else in the community informed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and we had, I think, maybe a group, a family. And so I see the Dixon and Murray family. So Dawn, Courtney, and Andrew. And I've got 3 names there, and I see 4 people sitting in the seats. And so you don't need to feel the need for everybody to come. We're happy to have all 4 of you if you wish to come up and speak. But just let us know who's actually at the microphones, so we can make sure we're addressing the right people. Welcome.
Okay. Hi, I'm Courtney Murray, and this is my mom, Dawn, and my brother, Andrew. And Andrew uses DTS. And on Saturday morning, I was with him when he got the call saying, as of today, you will no longer be able to ride the bus to work. And it wasn't very nice to watch him get that phone call, because he was confused and he was shaky, and he started worrying about his friends who wouldn't be able to take the bus. So I know this isn't your fault. You're not the ones who made the call, but I'm disappointed in the DTS board for deciding that they should just drop this with no notice, because it leaves families stuck, knowing what to do, how they're going to help the people that need the service. And a lot of these people don't have family that care. Andrew's pretty lucky, I think, because we're able to make some changes in our life to help him get to where he needs to go. But it bothers me that people with disabilities are constantly having to fight for rights for anything, like something simple like city transportation. And I'm kind of tired of it. And I'm sure my mom is too. So I'm just hoping that the city can work with the DTS board and figure something out. And if it means the city taking it over, I'm hoping that the board will actually let that happen. Because I've done some research too and checked other cities in Alberta that are similar size, and their transit service like this is taken care of by the city. So I think that we should really look at that option. Anything you wanted to say? Okay.
Hi. First, I want to thank Mayor Bill Givens for returning my email, and also Dylan for not only returning my email, but making time to meet with me last evening. That meant a lot. Made us feel like we mattered. Andrew and I moved here in September, partly due to family issues, partly due to needing more service for Andrew. And it has been amazing. He has had some really good service, and part of that good service, of course, is DTS, because it's allowed him to have freedom he never had before. He came from small town to big city. So the way I would like maybe to help you understand how it is for him. Let's say you've lived in Grand Prairie all your life, and then all of a sudden you are transferred to Hong Kong. And for a while it's okay because they have provided you with transportation. But then they take the transportation away and they tell you to go to public transit. And you're lost because Andrew doesn't read, so he can't take he cannot safely take public transit. And I just think that sometimes people like Andrew kind of fall between the cracks because he looks like he's able, but yet he's not. And I think that there's other options besides DTS, and I'm wondering if the city has thought about that, if they have thought about putting something out maybe that's competition for DTS. Maybe just a regular taxi that's subsidized.
So I guess in response to that, I would say a couple things. Yes, the city is open to all options. And a number of months ago, we did a request for proposals, or excuse me, a request for information, asking other providers how they might provide accessible transit services both within the city and on a regional basis, because there are other communities that we're connected to where people travel from their community in for services into Grand Prairie. And so that closed just in the last week or so, and we are actively in conversation with some of the respondents to that, the people who submitted ideas, to see what might be possible. In terms of competition with DTS, I think that that would be the city funding two different organizations to try to do the same thing. And to be really frank, I think to be responsible for taxpayers, we'd want to find a way to ensure that we're not competing with ourselves, and that we're providing a good level of service for people first and foremost, and that we're doing it in the most efficient and effective way possible. So all of those options are on the table. Council in our earlier session did direct administration to identify alternatives and options to be able to resume services and provide services on an ongoing basis. And it was a pretty broad motion, which meant that everything is still on the table. So absolutely, that discussion is underway, and it is still very preliminary, but it is underway and nothing is out of scope right now.
So you had said that DTS will cover till June 30th. Is that correct? So
the motion that we made was that the city confirm that our funding to DTS is there up until June 30th at the approved 2019 level. And the motion also included a requirement for DTS to resume service to the level that they're previously providing it. We did have a bit of a discussion and debate about whether how effective the city requiring them to do that might be, but the intent of the motion was to give the riders and the public some certainty that the city of Grand Prairie has not pulled funding, that we are happy to continue funding at the level that we approved back in December, and that we need to have a discussion with DTS about, well, if you can't provide this service on an ongoing basis, then maybe we need to use that money for something else after June 30th. Is that fair? Does that make sense? So the idea is that
it makes sense, but is that enough time to get something in place?
Well, I think all of us on around the council table appreciate how important it is that people's lives aren't disrupted on an ongoing basis for a long period of time. And so I'm not sure that at this stage, I don't know whether we know if that's enough time or not. But today, that was the amount of time that council is willing to provide. And if I can speak frankly, I think it really puts the burden on the city and on the DTS board to come up with a solution as quickly as we can, because that's what we need to do, is figure out something for the people who rely on the service. And so I think the intent behind the motion was, the reason that it wasn't September or December or October was to say, look, this is an urgent matter and we need to deal with it like that, like an urgent matter.
Will the clients be notified like tomorrow that their service will resume?
So yeah,
what's going to happen with that?
That was a part of the debate that we had. Is we sort of recognize that DTS is an independent organization. The employees work for DTS. They don't work for the City of Grand Prairie. The City of Grand Prairie doesn't have the membership list of DTS. We don't have a way to contact the members, and there probably are some legal requirements about whether or not DTS can just give us that list when the clients didn't necessarily sign up to say the city of Grand Prairie can have that information. So there are a bunch of complexities, and that's where, as I said to Ms. Wilmke, from our side, from the city of Grand Prairie, our intent would be to ensure that the public is aware of any steps that we're taking, and that we would share as much information as we can that's ours to share. But we don't have that direct relationship as it is today with the clients, and so we wouldn't have a way of providing that information direct to them, and we also don't have the control of the organization to understand how they're going to implement that motion from council, which I understand is not a perfect answer, and is not a helpful answer. We, I think, are also in a similar position of saying, look, we need to figure out how to resolve this, and this isn't satisfactory. We're also feeling unsatisfied, and I'm sure that really pales in comparison to the dissatisfaction of the people who rely on the service.
No, I can say it. Do I have to say it? I can talk loud. I'm not using the microphone.
Sure, Andrew. Andrew, if you're not comfortable using the microphone, that's absolutely no problem. Go ahead. We're happy to have you speak on behalf of yourself.
Because I had that phone call, I was really pissed off. Because I was mad and upset. As soon as they told me it's only for wheelchairs and not people who walk. And then I phoned my boss, Kevin, who works at GM Plumbing. I told him right away. And he said it wasn't right either. And I told me and him had a chat. Oh, he told me, guess I might have to start riding my pedal bike to work. And I said, yeah, I don't want to waste my sister's gas, or my mom's, or my brother-in-law's. I want that bus to take to work. If I get a job at PV Mart, I need somebody to take me to work. Who's going to do that? I've been on the bus all the time. I've been after them lots of times at the dispatcher, and they never answer their goddamn phones.
Okay, language.
So what?
No, language.
That's fine. And then I keep on phoning and phoning, no answer. And I got mad. Then I phone again. Then there's an answer. Because there's places I want to go. I want to go to my friend Kendra's house. Because I go there to play games. And I phone the bus ahead of time. So I can book it to go there. And I told the bus people that too. And now I just have to get a ride. And I just don't want to waste my sister's gas. And I don't want her taking her lunch break off. Just to come and get me and take me to work. And today I talked to my boss too again. And this guy, Dave guy, we call him Old Dave. He said stuff about the bus too. He said that's not fair. It's not right. He said a lot of stuff too. Because I told him. And my boss, Kevin, said that's not right and that's not fair either. And I told some other guys at work, told my boss, Greg, this handy bus is just for people that are in wheelchairs now. That's what I got told on the phone. I told him. And he said, that's not right either. And then I told the secretary's husband the same thing in a couple of words. And I asked him, can, if it was you riding on the bus, if they didn't take you on the bus, I asked him, can you take them to court? He said, yeah, if it was me, I would take them to court. And he said, yeah, you can, if you wanted to. It made him mad enough. And it makes me mad enough. Really mad. And makes me upset. And now my boss Kevin told me I'll have to start riding my bike to work. And that made my sister upset too. Because she told me, what if there's someone underneath the bridge who wants to ask you for money? She won't let me ride alone until I get practice.
It sounds like your sister and your mom really care a great deal about you. And
I told it to Kevin and my brother-in-law, and Kevin said, ride your bike to work. I said, the first time I'll take my worker. And then after that, I'll go by myself. So I work Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the rest of the days, I'm with my worker. What? What do you have more to say? What? Okay.
Andrew, thanks very much for being here this evening to speak on your own behalf and share the impact that the change has had on your life and your ability to get to work safely.
I made a lot of friends on that bus.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you three for being here this evening. And I think you heard some of the steps the city's taking, and we will do our part to ensure that the public and you are aware of what's happening with those discussions as best as we can. And please know that we share the concern about trying to resume service as soon as possible. Thank you. So appreciate the presentations, and I'm happy that we had two different alternatives today at our new council system, with an opportunity for people to come in the afternoon as well as in the evening. I think that probably handles the people who are here to speak to the DTS issue. We do have a short council agenda with respect to some other land use planning issues, and you're more than welcome to stay because they're always very, very interesting. But you're not required to stay by all means. And so if you have said your piece, as I said, with respect to accessible transportation in the city, you can expect the City of Grand Prairie to be doing more communication about that over the next little while. And so look to the City of Grand Prairie or any of the news media that you follow to find the latest news from the City of Grand Prairie for that. So we'll close the delegation portion of our agenda, and we'll move on to item number 14, public hearings. I would call this public hearing to order for amendments to the Municipal Development Plan, Bylaw C-1237-0, and the Land Use Bylaw C-1260-105. I would look to administration for an introduction. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Both of these bylaws are amendments to allow for the temporary relaxation of the 25% limitation on the application of the small lot residential district to new outline plans. And the way we got here is that in November 2018, the Grand Prairie chapter of the Urban Development Institute presented to the Infrastructure and Protective Services Committee requesting that the city review a 25% limit, the limit on narrow lot development. So a little bit of history for council, as this limit was implemented many, many years ago. Over the last 30 years, the various versions of the city's land use bylaw have all contained narrow lot land use district. It had a number of different names. The most current name is RS. The previous one was RL, and then there were different names prior to that. But The term RS, or narrow lot, is referring to all of those land use districts. Past complaints and criticisms of narrow lot development was a lack of on-street parking. There were snow clearing challenges, some examples of poor aesthetics, both on the property and the streetscape as a whole. Part of that poor aesthetics was that there was no or little landscaping along with wide driveways. In some cases, there was a proliferation of secondary suites. There was a poor use of rear lane access, and in that land use district, when there is a rear lane, you're required to have the access to the property off of that lane. This is in contrast to more mature neighborhoods where there is a lane and it's a secondary access, and most of the properties also have a front driveway. And not specific to the RS district, but a problem that was also occurring was that there are RV storage issues. However, with small lot development, there are a number of benefits as well. It diversifies the housing stock, and in that it provides a number of affordable housing options in the form of first-time homebuyers or first single detached house for a number of people looking to enter the market. From the city's overall perspective, it provides a compact urban form which reduces urban sprawl. And it can be done well, and we do have a number of examples of good narrow lot development. So going back to 2006, when a number of these concerns were front and center on Council's mind, Council essentially provided a directive to administration to get rid of narrow lot land use district out of the land use bylaw. And planning staff, seeing the benefits of some of the of narrow lot development, proposed to Council to limit the application of small lot development to 25% of an outline plan area. And at the time, Council agreed, and the 25% limitation remains in effect to date. Since 2006, the city has got to work to address a number of the issues that were front and center in Council's mind in 2006. So the lot width has increased in the land use district. We've also gotten a lot better at applying rear lanes. So there were some instances where there were some unfortunate design use of lanes, and we've since gotten a lot better at recognizing those in advance of outline plan adoption and negotiating with the developer a better use of lanes. Council, over the last few years, implemented changes to the land use bylaw that limit driveway width. We have far more strategic snow clearing practices. We have a wider road right-of-way, and that was when engineering reviewed their cross-section years ago. And we've also implemented secondary suite regulations. So a number of the concerns that Council had at the time have been addressed by these individual initiatives. So when UDI presented at the November Infrastructure and Protective Services Committee, there was a motion that was passed that directed administration to work with UDI to strike a working group, including members of Council, to review the 25% limit of narrow lot development. And in January, we met with reps of UDI and certain members of Council, and we had a discussion about a lot of the issues, and I provided a history like I just did. And we talked a lot about the market and what developers are seeing the need for. And it was agreed that Council could consider a temporary relaxation of the limitation to allow UDI to bring on phases quickly. UDI has stated that there's a demand for this type of housing product and that they're eager to meet that demand. And that while we entertain this temporary relaxation, administration and UDI will work together on a comprehensive review of the narrow lot development, and that would come in two forms. One is that we would look at overall neighborhood design. And what I mean by that is where we put RS development within a neighborhood. So if say, for example, there's still a concern about on-street parking, then maybe when we do RS, we only allow it on one side of the street, or we allow it where it's opposite of municipal reserve or a storm pond or something to that effect, where there's far more on-street parking on the other side of the street. We're confident that there's a number of strategies that we can apply to allow for more RS development throughout a neighborhood. So that's what I mean when I talk about overall neighborhood design. And then the second piece is that we would review lot standards. So lot standards are the individual, like front yard setback, side yard, rear yard, lot coverage, driveway width, landscaping, and so on. So let me just so the intent is to, as I stated, to allow developers to bring on the next phase of development for RS. Council would be presented with individual applications to amend the outline plan and rezone property. So this is not a matter of letting the cows out of the barn, so to speak. It's providing an opportunity for applications to be presented for council's consideration. The MDP amendment contains a number of considerations that administration and council will review when considering these applications. And from that perspective, administration is confident that this is a very low risk endeavor, and it gives the city and developers the opportunity to meet demand. And both UDI and administration are committed to doing a more comprehensive review, and that would be presented to council in due course. So as such, it's administration's recommendation that council give all readings to both bylaws, and I'm open to any questions council may have.
Great. Thanks very much, Mr. Johnson. Any questions for administration at this stage? We'll have one opportunity before we close as well. Council, any questions for administration? Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Just a question, just so I understand the temporary relaxation is, and there's no dates attached to it at this point. Is there kind of a timeline that we're looking at it being temporary? Is it a year, 2 years, or?
Mr. Johnson?
There is no specified timeline, but it's certainly our intentions to get straight to work on the exercise. The council has budgeted money for a comprehensive MDP review in 2020, but I believe that we would be back to council in advance of that more comprehensive exercise. I may be optimistic here, but I believe that it isn't too complicated of an exercise, and we do have a number of ideas that we've discussed already, and I'm confident that we'll be back.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Johnson.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for the work that you've put into this. I appreciate the very thorough consultative process that this went through to get to this point. Just echoing Councillor Palat's question, at whose discretion is the relaxation lifted? That's one part of the discussion I don't recall being part of. Like, is it administration's request? When does the relaxation sort of tighten up? Is there any parameters on that? Mr. Johnson.
Short of the wording in the municipal development plan amendment, I'll just read it. I'll read the sentence leading into it, but proposed amendments will be reviewed based on the following considerations, and there's a number of bullets. So administration will go through that, and then council will also have the opportunity to consider each individual application. So this isn't saying that any individual application is going to be successful. We will be reviewing it in the context of these bullet points, as well as any ideas that I've alluded to in terms of the overall design. Even though it's not captured in a bylaw, it's certainly planning's job to offer that review and give those considerations to council. So council certainly isn't bound to approve anything. And I guess in that sense, that's part of the reason why I don't feel that there's a risk, and not to make it sound like we're not going to get to work, but necessarily any urgency as well, because I don't think that there's going to be a large number of applications being presented to council in the long run on this one.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. I guess if there aren't any other questions for administration at this stage, then we'll ask if there are any members of the public here to speak to these proposed changes to the municipal development plan. Gentlemen, you made your way here this evening. We certainly want to make sure that you have an opportunity to speak. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Given, Council. I'm Scott Rossler with Helix Engineering. Jeremy Walker here is with me representing UDI as well. First, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. This has been a fairly lengthy process to kind of get here, so I think we're happy with it. And as Councillor Clayton said, it was very consultative, so we had a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion. But in Mr. Johnson's report, from my opinion, I read it here this last week, and it's fairly thorough. I think most of the issues that were raised through the consultation process are definitely outlined in the report. So thanks to him for putting that together, because it's there was a lot to think about. We also appreciate your willingness to respond to industry. This is something that has been on UDI's mind for quite some time, and it's definitely been beat around for it seems like several years, as far as trying to be able to respond to increasing costs and demands of home purchasers. So with that being said, if there's any questions for us, if Mr. Walker has anything to add, I would let him do that. But if there aren't any further questions, then we don't anticipate a whole bunch of, like, an onslaught of amendments coming forward, but this definitely gives us a little more freedom to react when demand does require it. So.
Thanks very much, gentlemen. Looks like there may be some questions. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you very given. I appreciate you guys coming in, and I appreciate some of the past conversations we've had when you guys have come to council. I also know that there will be some in the community that will be a little bit worried about this, and I think their concerns were well addressed by Mr. Johnson. But I'm also just curious if you could give us an idea from your guys' perspective of what it means to make a lot a little bit smaller, in terms of why that those few feet can make a big difference to you guys, and why this is important to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Councillor Bressie. So really, we're talking about 4 feet is roughly what the change in this is from the RG zoning to RS. So we did a lot through the consultation process. We did some drawings, showed basically what the difference would be in houses and whatnot, and really what this boiled down to is you can essentially build the same house on both of those lots. A lot of the houses that are being built today on a 40-foot lot are wasting some space. So this basically just allows the same house to be constructed on a smaller lot. So instead of having an 8-foot side yard, you'll have a 4-foot side yard, which is pretty standard in most cities and most larger centers. So we don't really expect that it's going to change anything from, like, an aesthetics perspective or architectural controls or anything like that. This really is about trying to make sure that when a builder is buying a lot, or a custom buyer is buying a lot, that they're buying the amount of land they need rather than excessive land. So it does make things a little more affordable. In all honesty, just that lot purchase at the end of the area of the lot that's there is in the tens of thousands of dollars. So it's a significant amount of money that we can reduce on the home prices. So I don't expect any major changes from the product that's being provided, but obviously that's subject to builders and what they decide to do within the bylaw. So.
But for you guys, it's desirable because it's a big cost savings you can pass on to, you can share with the home buyer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the intention. So.
And of course, just pointing out that it's also desirable for us because it's cheaper to service that neighborhood with more houses, and we have to replace roads or plow them or think about fire stations and all that as well.
One of the exercises that we ran through was certainly to do with tax assessment, and it definitely increases the assessment for the same amount of infrastructure that the city's providing. So realistically, it should be beneficial to the city tax base.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. Any other questions for the delegation? Gentlemen, I have one, I guess, from there were a couple of questions previously about the temporary nature of this. And was there what is the industry perspective on sort of a sunset to this? Appreciating that this is a bit of a new process where council has sort of inserted anything in the municipal development plan that's of a temporary nature. So does industry have any particular objection if council was to consider putting a time frame on this? Appreciating, as Mr. Johnson said, that there are other processes that would likely make that irrelevant, but was there any particular perspective from industry on that?
If I could address that, Mayor Given. I think the exercise has brought us all to the same place, in the realization that we will likely get this accomplished in advance, as Mr. Johnson said, of the review of the MDP. So if we were to have to put a parameter around it, I would suggest that if we tied it to that might be something that would be more palatable, but I don't think we'd have any objection from an industry perspective.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, Council? I don't see anybody ringing in. So, gentlemen, thanks for being here, and thanks for participating in the process and the discussion sort of on an ongoing basis. Appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, so one last opportunity for questions for administration. I guess I have one, Mr. Johnson, just in terms of the idea of the temporary nature of this, appreciating and acknowledging what you said, that it's likely that other processes would deal with this broad issue. I think the responsibility of council is, and so what if it does? What if that doesn't happen? How can we ensure that we don't get any unintended consequences out of this if other things take over that MDP review, or anything else? Would a change to the MDP amendment that's proposed that said, where it says, starting in the spring of 2019, council is supportive of a limited and temporary relaxation, would language saying and temporary not continuing past spring of 2021, would that have that effect of saying this is the window which council is providing this relaxation, so that council and the community could have more certainty about the temporariness of that? Would that have the effect that I'm hoping that it would have?
Thank you, Mayor Given. I think it's slightly unusual for an MDP to say that, but I don't see any problem with it. And in the meantime, I'd just like to point out, Director Glavin did bring it to my attention that there was a motion passed at that IPS in the May IPS meeting that administration review these bylaw amendments in the second quarter of 2020 and report back to committee. So that is something that will be kept for on administration's outstanding items list. But certainly if council wish to send that message explicitly in the MDP, I think that's a totally reasonable amendment, and I don't see any problem with it.
Okay. So for council, that, this is actually, I'm not sure that we've ever had a temporary relaxation of anything in our MDP and explicitly said that. And at least for me, saying that something's temporary means that you sort of at least telegraph what the intended end is, or the maximum. And if we wanted to, we could renew it at that point, or if other things have changed, then great, and we don't have to worry about it when that happens. But I just would, appreciating that we're trying something new, I would have an extra level of comfort and confidence of having some kind of sunset in there. There might be a couple of different ways, but I would see it coming at when we say temporary, and temporary until when. And I'm open for suggestion from council members on that. I certainly would be happy to give a fairly long window. That's where I would see the spring of 2021 as being kind of a reasonable amount of time, so that industry has that certainty, and so there's more, what should be, based on what Mr. Johnson said, more than enough time for the other processes and the review of the MDP in this issue to take place. Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I appreciate the intent here. I guess my concern with a time frame on it is that, given the economic environment we're currently in, and that there's not a ton of building forecasted, et cetera, in the next 6 months. And if we were to look in the next, in my mind, the goal of this is to have optimal mix of different properties within a subdivision. And with putting a time frame, I would be disappointed that the outcome out of it came not necessarily the best suited mix, because of the fact that potentially a developer could put a bunch of these. There's obvious revenue benefits, and I would hate the wrong mix to be there for financial reasons. I think this is a mix right now that's good for both builders and developers and the municipality. And so, although albeit 20 to 21 is a decent amount of time frame, given Mr. Johnson's reply that council is heavily involved in this process of what the parameters are. Initially, I wasn't comfortable with the sort of the temporary relaxation piece of it, but I think given the involvement with the council and administration, that I think that that would be safeguarded. And I don't know if it necessarily does need a time frame. I wouldn't want to go any tighter than 2021, but even that 2021 is pretty quick. It's not that far away, so that would be my concern with the time frame.
I guess the other observation that I would make just in response is that as we start to talk about 2021, there is an election, and as council knows, things can change from council to council, and so an intent of a motion or a discussion or an intent of a council can be lost between terms. And so if for any unforeseen reason, administrative workload, industry gets busy, whatever, this council doesn't get a chance to address the issue, like Mr. Johnson said, we would be able to. These things happen. If this council intended for this to be a limited time thing, that a council, ours or the next one, would have to consider whether that was a good idea or not, then it should be written down somewhere. And so that's just what I propose. I 100% trust administration. And at the same time, I've been at this long enough to know that through elections, things change and unexpected things come up that can impact workload and mean that things don't happen as quick as we'd like. The discussion about whether 25% was the right number or not was a long discussion, a very, very long discussion. And so that's where I just certainly would encourage council to think about that. And I certainly, if anybody was going to make an amendment to provide that sort of window, I would certainly support and encourage that. I don't see anybody else in the queue for discussion. And if there's not, then we will move on to, I will close the public hearing and we will move on to business arising. And we would start with first reading of the Municipal Development Plan Amendment. I see Councillor Bressie in the queue.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Given. I would move the council give first reading to Bylaw C-123370, being an amendment to the Municipal Development Plan.
Okay, thanks very much. There's no discussion or debate or amendments on first reading, so we'll call for the vote on first reading of the MDP Plan Amendment. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. I'd move the council give second reading to Bylaw C-123370.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. So that's a motion for second reading. I will say that I won't vote for second reading without an amendment to provide a close to that temporary window, just because of that unforeseen circumstance. I believe everybody has the right intent that it will get addressed this term, and if it didn't, I want to ensure that I am not doing our community a disservice by setting up something that we didn't necessarily intend, and so I wouldn't be able to support it without that that close to the time frame. Is there any other discussion or debate? Councillor Platt?
I agree with Mayor Given on this one. I think setting some goalposts is a good idea of some kind. I think it's, council by council can change. I also think administration sometimes does want some direction from us, and I think this gives the administration, although they're going to be working on the MDP, it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. I think if we go 2 years, it gives that industry at least a window of time, and it'll keep the conversation going and it'll work. So I would think that we should be looking at it like a May 31st, 2020. So I would put an amendment that we would have the temporary be till May 31st of 2021. Sorry, not 20. That's not quite long enough. 2021, and that will create us an opportunity to have to review whether this becomes permanent business, or we can at that time potentially choose another temporary relaxation for another period of time. But I think it is important we put some goalposts and I'm thinking about this for both sides, for administration, but also for industry. I appreciate that we have an opportunity to look at all these amendments as they come forward. But it'd be disappointing if somebody within industry thought, hey, I'm going to try to do this. And we, in the meantime, said, actually, we're not doing the temporary thing anymore. So I think it gives a little bit of certainty to industry, like Mayor Given had mentioned, and to administration. So that's the amendment I'd like to make to the motion.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for that, Councillor Palat. Any discussion or debate on Councillor Palat's amendment? I don't see anybody in the queue. And so I will call for the vote on Councillor Palat's amendment. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. So we'll move on to second reading as amended. Any discussion or debate on second reading as amended? Seeing none, then we'll call for the vote on second reading. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Councillor Bressie.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Given. I would move that council have third reading for bylaw C-12-370 at this meeting.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. So a motion to have third and final reading. In order to have all three readings of a bylaw at the same council meeting, this motion must pass unanimously. And then after that, we can have third reading. If it doesn't pass unanimously, then the third reading would come back at our next city council meeting. Is there any discussion or debate as to the merits of having third and final reading here this evening? I don't see anybody in the queue, so I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you, Council. That motion carries. Councillor Bressie, we have some other amendment documents we need to amend.
Yeah, so I would...
Sorry, third and final.
Sorry. We didn't give third reading, right? Yeah,
third and final,
sorry.
yeah.
So yeah, I would move that we give third reading to bylaw C-12-370.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. Sorry to already be skipping ahead. Any discussion or debate on third and final reading? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. I'm looking for one more vote, Councillor. Just make sure yours is registered. Thank you. That motion carries. Councillor Bressie.
Great, Mayor Given. I would move the council give first reading to bylaw C-1260-105, being an amendment to the land use bylaw.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. So motion for first reading, no discussion or debate. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back and forth. I need to find my number again. I would move the council give second readings bylaw C-1260-105.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. Any discussion or debate on this change to the land use bylaw? Seeing none, then I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Councillor Bressie.
I would move the council have third reading for bylaw C-1260-105 at this meeting.
Okay, so as with our previous item, this motion must pass unanimously in order for us to move on to third and final reading. I have a member of administration in the queue here, so is there an item that council needs to be aware of before we move on to third and final reading of the land use bylaw? Mr. Johnson?
Sorry, Mayor Given. It is not a matter with respect to the bylaw, it's the MDP. And all of the motions that Councillor Bressie made me aware of a typo in my report, in that it's 12370 on the first line, but the actual bylaw is 12370. And I would hate for that to become a problem. So if the records could reflect that that was Councillor Bressie's intentions.
Yeah. Probably just a pronunciation difference, and it's hard to tell the difference between
12370 versus 12370.
The zeros are the larger circle. The O's are just slightly skinnier. Okay.
My report does have that mistake.
Thanks very much, and certainly appreciate that intent. We'll make sure that it's clarified in the minutes. So we'll move on. Sorry, Councillor Bressie, was that a motion to have?
I believe it was.
Motion to have third and final reading, or third? Okay, there you go. So we heard the spiel previously on the having third and final motion to have third and final reading must pass unanimously. Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Thank you. That motion carries unanimously, so we can have third and final reading. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you. I would move that council give third reading to bylaw C-1260-105. And may I ask a question as I make that?
Sure.
Given the sunset clause we made in the NDP, would it be wise to also amend this to have a sunset clause in that, or do you think it's okay?
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor Given. I don't see the need. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for the question, Councillor Bressie. Any other discussion or debate on third and final reading of this change to the land use bylaw, which has the effect of basically implementing the change that we made to the municipal development plan? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. That motion carries. That's all the business arising from that public hearing. Once again, my thanks to administration and the members of the development community for their collaboration on bringing this forward. An innovative solution, sort of a first, I think, in the city of Grand Prairie, certainly in my time. But certainly appreciate the work together to be able to resolve this issue. That'll take us to item number 15, which was delegation business. We had 2 delegations related to accessible transit and DTS. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. So we did make some motions earlier related to DTS, and I don't think there's anything to add to that. So I would like to move that we accept the presentations for information.
Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. Any discussion or debate on that motion? And I would just say, I see that Ms. Blimke is still here. We can absolutely find you the text. I'm sure it will be reported on of the motions that were made at the earlier session of council. But the receiving your presentation for information basically says we heard you, we understand, and those other actions that we passed earlier on are the ones we'll continue to keep the community informed on. Any other discussion or debate on Councillor Friesen's motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. And that takes us to council member reports. Council, I'm still getting used to the rhythm of this 2-session council. Do any council members have reports from their external agencies, boards, or commissions? Not at this time? Well, if that's the case, then we'll move to council member roundtable, and we'll start with Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'm sure there's a few of us who were at FCM in Quebec City here recently, so I won't go into too much detail, but just say it was a good conference. And it was a lot of fun, but it was also an eye-opener of some things. One of the things that was an eye-opener today was talking about DTS and realizing, boy, I'm sure glad that we have what we have in Grand Prairie, because it would not be fun to be disabled in that city. It was not an easy place to get around, and made me an eye-opener, a little bit more proud of the things we do offer in our community that way that I would have probably taken for granted until I got on council. I think the highlight of the events I had the last couple of weeks was the Water to Wembley groundbreaking events. I mean, I want to really congratulate Mayor Termine from the town of Wembley and his council, especially to the mayor out there this has been a passion piece for him for a lot of years, and it makes you realize that sometimes you go on for 1 term and it takes you 3 terms to accomplish something, and that's something that took him a long time to accomplish. But I think it's great for the community. And I'm proud that we were part of it, although I know some people are frustrated sometimes with the Aquaterra involvement and the city not getting its fair share and whatever they may think. It was the right thing to do for the region. So I'm proud that we did that, and I'm really, really happy for the town of Wembley that they got their water.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. I don't have a ton to report on. I left town to go care for my daughter who's recovering from surgery shortly after last council meeting and returned just yesterday. But I did make it this morning to help paint the rainbow sidewalk. It is Pride Month. June is Pride Month. And I hear a lot about, why do we have to have Pride and why are we doing this? And as we heard some of the comments and the gesturing and so forth from some of the motorists passing by, I think that's very clear why we still continue to need to do this. Until it does not matter what someone's gender or sexual orientation are in our city, we will continue to support things like Pride very heartily. And I did notice too that all of the dozens of pictures that were taken of us, it was a nice one of your bum and mine that made it onto the Pride page. So there we go, Mayor Given, we're there.
In a way. Thanks very much, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Minhas.
It was kind of slow. Just I went to the Wembley water thing with our colleague Wade and Cabin O'Toole. It was a pretty great thing that happened. And also went to the chamber for our revolving, what they call that, Dominion thing there. It was chamber Thursday. And also went to the Stampede because I didn't go to Quebec City. So Stampede was very grateful, and I see our mayor was there and his dignity just run away from him when he took the picture and gone. It was busy. I guess you were very busy, but it was good fun there and lots. I'm very surprised there was lots of people because last year I missed it because we were away in Halifax. So there's lots of good things happening, those races and all the stuff, and the good for the kids, those all pinging and stuff. They do things so there were lots of people show up. So it was great. That's about it.
Thanks, Councilor Minhas. Councilor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I have nothing to report at this time.
Thanks, Councilor Clayton. Councilor Bressie.
Well, make me go fast. I think I also spent some time at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities representing the city with some of our colleagues, and I think the highlight for me was at this event. There's always a trade show where there's a whole bunch of different booths that represent municipal interests, and saw some interesting machinery that could be cool for our potholes. I saw some software that I'm really excited about that I think could significantly help nonprofits here in Canada, and I saw a few other neat things like that. But the real highlight for me was I got to actually work the trade show. I got to spend a morning in a booth put on by Resource Communities of Canada, talking about why we should talk about Canadian energy. And appropriately, I got to sit in that booth right after Prime Minister Trudeau addressed FCM. And Trudeau made a lot of funding promises to municipalities for infrastructure and affordable housing. And I got to point out, while the reason that the federal government can afford to support municipal interests across the country is because of the contributions that come from our resource industry. And it was interesting seeing these municipal leaders from some municipalities that have strongly opposed pipelines and Alberta interests walk by and give the skeptical look. And then I'd kind of reel them in a little bit, explaining that this wasn't an industry booth. This was a booth put on by municipalities. And got to talk, and I don't know if I convinced them. They definitely didn't convince me, but we had some genial conversation, and we actually had a lot more questions. It was interesting talking to some of these people that just had no idea what the Alberta energy industry is about, in terms of they thought that up here in Grand Prairie we were nothing but oil sands, and we were nothing but investment from foreign companies, which is so far from the truth. So it was great to be able to tell them a little bit about our energy and a little bit about some of the investments, the social investments that local companies and Alberta companies are making in our country. So that was the highlight for me. I think it's also a good reminder to me of seeing how active some of these municipalities are in lobbying against Alberta interests, and also talking to councillors from across the country who are advocating for all kinds of things from their country, some that don't touch the energy industry except for how it pays for these things, but talking to them about how seriously a lot of municipalities are taking advocacy and how they've managed to affect the whole country, some of them, and how some of them have just managed to get some really great projects in their community through advocacy. And I think it was a good challenge to me in terms of, I think that there might be some areas where we need to pick up our boots and make our voice better heard.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. And thanks to all the council members who did attend and participate in the advocacy efforts at the FCM convention. Grand Prairie was an early adopter of the Resource Communities of Canada Coalition as put forward by AUMA. I appreciate that it was out in full force at the FCM convention, and glad that we had members of council there to support that initiative and get those conversations going. I'll just report on a few things. I had an opportunity to meet with our Grand Prairie MLA Tracy Allard and Municipal Affairs Minister Madhu as he was in Grand Prairie making an announcement of provincial government support for evacuees from the high level and northern forest fires. Had a good about 45-minute chat with the minister after he had made his announcement, and so it was great to make that connection in person and have a bit of a discussion. I attended at the GP Stampede Bust-Out Party at Revolution Place, which is the kickoff to Stampede Week. And I did, as Councillor Minhas mentioned, leave my daughter's 8th birthday party so that I could be there for the wagon ride on the Friday night. But as soon as it was done, I hightailed it out of there, spurs flying and everything, to get back to the birthday party. And I also attended two different events that that you might not immediately think of as linked. One was an employee recognition, and the other was the presentation of Alberta Emergency Services medals here at City Hall. In the past, our fire department has regularly used City Council chambers to present service medals to members of our fire service. We did one a little bit earlier this spring, and that came to the attention of our Alberta Health Services EMS service, who also earned the same medals for their years of service, but they never had a place to present them. And so they asked whether they could use council chambers. And so we agreed that they could. And so it was my pleasure to be here on behalf of the city and with the EMS service to make presentations recognizing up to 40 years of service in the EMS field, which is pretty incredible. So it was great to have that, and hopefully that'll be an annual tradition where they would attend at City Hall and we get that chance to recognize those services. The other event, the employee recognition, I attended later that day, as chance would have it. And it was over at the Montrose Cultural Center where the custodians were having a team meeting. And I was there to recognize Alex, one of our custodial staff, who saved a life. They recognized that there was a client in distress at Montrose Cultural Center in one of the elevators. Alex and other staff attended, and Alex actually administered naloxone and interrupted the overdose that the gentleman was having. He was revived before EMS even arrived on site, and it's not every day that somebody in the custodial area gets a chance to save a life. But the fact is that in our community today, many people in many different lines of work are being called on to step into life-saving situations. And frankly, I'm emotional and proud that our City of Grand Prairie staff in all areas are ready to step into the breach when it's needed. It's a shame that we're in a situation where people would need to consume and feel that they don't have any other safe place to do that. And it is vitally important that we continue to ensure that, number one, people's lives are saved. And then number two, that we work on addressing their challenges. So I was so proud to be able to go and recognize Alex, who stepped in when she needed to. And with that, we're adjourned.